Finally, we're at the last presentation for the day. Robert Barwick is a 30-year veteran of the Citizens Party, is the party's Research Director and National Media Spokesman, and is the lead candidate, Senate candidate for Victoria. Robbie spearheads the ACP's political campaigns and organising in Parliament, where he has travelled most months of the year every year since 2018 to talk sense to politicians. Robbie represented the ACP at all 13 hearings of the recent Senate inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia and testified at the Canberra hearing alongside Glenn Isherwood. Please welcome Robbie to speak on how the Citizens Party will represent citizens in Parliament.
I debated whether I would read my speech or not. The two stars of the day, clearly the two stars of the day did not read their speeches, but I want to stick to the time limit. I also have some news before I begin. As of yesterday, the votes are settled to defeat the misinformation and disinformation bill. However, Parliament begins tomorrow. Absolutely true. The votes, Senator Fatima Payman and Senator Jackie Lambie both joined the majority of independents to oppose it. So now it doesn't matter if the Greens support it or not. But Parliament sits tomorrow, and we'll see how determined Mr Albanese and Minister Rowland are to get this bill through and what tricks they might think they have up their sleeve. They've all made public statements though, the senators, and so I can't imagine them being able to backtrack, but let's wait until the government drops the bill. All right. Craig, thanks for that introduction. Thank you very much. John Shipton, I knew when I invited John to speak that we would get a real dose of political philosophy. I think he's Australia's leading political philosopher, and he was a wonderful advocate, clearly, for his son Julian, and that is another victory that we can all be proud of in this country. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hakim. Hakim approached me, and I thought it would be a wonderful idea for people to see from Hakim's work with us very closely. He's part of our inner circle working here in Melbourne now over the last little period. I thought it'd be great for people to see the Citizens Party through his eyes instead of just through mine all the time. But now you're going to see it through my eyes. Today, all of our speakers have expressed the ideals which should govern our country. The problem is, the way politics is practiced, we are conditioned to accept that ideals are a fantasy and that we need to settle for political compromises cobbled together in back rooms by compromised politicians. Speaking for myself and why I'm committed to the work of the Citizens Party, I don't believe we should accept that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fantasist. There will always be compromises in politics and statecraft, and sometimes they're very important, especially in diplomacy, to achieve peaceful outcomes. But when it comes to the way the government is supposed to serve the people in basic services and infrastructure, we have every right to demand an idealistic approach compared to what we get now. We should demand proper banking, postal, health, education and other services, and reliable, affordable power, water, transportation and communications infrastructure. We should demand governments correct their mistakes if they screw up. We should demand compensation for financial victims and people wronged by governments and big corporations. We should demand protection for whistleblowers. We should demand fair treatment for refugees and absolutely demand proper care for military veterans. We should demand accountability for committing our soldiers to criminal foreign wars and war powers reform so we stop following our great and powerful friends into every criminal war. That is not being fantasies. It's refusing to compromise with the corruption which defines the two major parties and makes them incapable of addressing real problems with genuine solutions, who assume they'll get away with it politically because they put up a united front of failure. The good news, politically, is the vast majority of Australians agree that the government should serve the people with proper services and infrastructure. They just can't understand why it doesn't. And for a long time, it's left them confused and disenchanted with politics. The problem is disenchantment turns to demoralisation and the insidious idea that nothing can be done, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe nothing can be done and do nothing, nothing will be done. The Citizens Party has built its success entirely on organising everyday Australians to understand that something can be done and recruiting them to do it. Alongside the big issues of stopping disastrous wars and retaking democratic control of the financial system, we have been able to mobilise Australians to fight on everyday issues of universal concern, including saving cash, saving post offices, stopping bank branch closures, compensating financial victims, and stopping social media censorship. We have identified those issues are an essential part of the fight on the bigger issues. With this approach, we have been profoundly effective in driving policy debates, pushing Parliament to address crucial issues, and most recently, forcing the government to engage with the policy solution of a post office bank. To see this approach at work, and also to see how the Citizens Party would represent citizens in Parliament, look at our record of success from outside of Parliament. Before we go through that record, I first want to provide some insights into how this process has played out. One important insight, such as it is that the Citizens Party's success has been achieved by a combination of three things. One, our laser focus on the corrupting power of vested corporate interests and foreign interests over our politics, which are the forces we are fighting to reclaim our sovereignty. Second, our method of informing and empowering everyday Australian citizens to take responsibility for the functioning of government and participate in the policy process by engaging with politicians, making submissions to inquiry, etc. Citizens Party supporters are the most informed and active supporters of any political party in Australia. You can applaud yourself for that. Three, our willingness to work with all groups and all parties on areas of common ground. Often being the only party in the room prepared to let others take the credit because the policy is more important than the glory. The other insight related to that third point is that the increase in the power of our work has coincided with an unprecedented and precipitous decline in the establishment's grip on electoral power, as seen in the plunge in votes for the two major political parties. To illustrate this point, I want to pay tribute to someone from another political party, which may be surprising. That person was an advisor to the Australian Greens named Fraser Brindley, who tragically passed away last year. I got to know Fraser in 2017 when he responded to a call from a Citizens Party supporter, Garth Gilbert. Wave, Garth. Garth called me and said, "This guy wants to talk to you." And the call was from Garth about the bail-in bill, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Despite being from very different parties, Fraser and I bonded right away on the importance of breaking the chains of financial corruption controlling Australia. At his funeral, Fraser's colleagues all paid tribute to how he educated the Greens Party on the importance of taking on the corrupt banks, accounting firms and other vested interests. They also acknowledged that Fraser emphasised the importance of building coalitions to take up the fight to these vested interests. It's due to Fraser that the Greens have played an increasingly important role in Parliament on these non-green issues, such as in the PwC inquiry and the Coles-Woolies inquiries. I want to acknowledge Andy Schmulow's very important contribution to those inquiries, and Andy also knew Fraser well. Combined with the rest of the parties and independents on the crossbench, this process has led to an extraordinary development. The big, previously untouchable corporate interests are suddenly worried that their grip on power is weakening. CBA CEO Matt Comyn, or Crybaby Comyn, as we call him, expressed this fear in a parliamentary hearing in August, which Andy also referred to earlier. Comyn whined, over and over, businesses in Australia are being represented in this false dichotomy that for a company to earn any sort of income or profit, it is somehow being unjustly extracted from consumers. He knows his business model. I think this continuing, often fact-free rhetoric that's being published more broadly is very damaging. It is really eroding trust in institutions, in all of our institutions. I think that's a real cause for concern. Boo, hoo, hoo. Recently, both the Labor Party and the Coalition and their corporate backers have been whining that the Greens aren't sticking to green issues anymore. No, thanks to Fraser Brindley, they are, in their own way, part of the crossbench revolt that unites pretty much all of them, including with One Nation and the independents, against corporatised corruption. This unity is imperfect, but it is terrifying those who hold the reins of real power. And although not in Parliament, the Citizens Party is playing a leading role in this revolt, liaising with all the parties. Perhaps our most important contribution is our focus, because unlike many of our collaborators, we tend not to get sidetracked on other issues, such as culture wars and the like. We lead by identifying and researching the crucial issues, take them to the various parties, and they respond. Let's now go through the Citizens Party's recent record, and as we go through, consider this question. If this party can do this from outside of Parliament, what can it do from inside? Since 2017, the Citizens Party has either single-handedly achieved or played a leading role in achieving 11 Senate inquiries and had legislation introduced in Parliament 4 times, and we've stopped 2 bills and maybe now 3, but we won't count that yet. In 2017, we campaigned to expose the government's Crisis Resolution Powers and Other Measures Bill as a bail-in law. Bail-in is the perverse policy of confiscating customer deposits to prop up failing too big to fail banks, thus putting innocent bank customers on the hook for the gambling losses of the banks. This was a huge campaign. It's how we met Fraser Brindley, and in response to our efforts, the Greens moved a Senate inquiry, which attracted unprecedented attention on a Citizens Party campaign. Spooked by this attention, the Liberal government and Labor opposition rushed the bill into law on St Valentine's Day 2018 with no formal division vote and only 8 senators present in the chamber. But it also attracted the attention of people who have become key collaborators with the Citizens Party, including John Adams, who you just heard from, and banking analyst Martin North. In 2020, our collaboration with John and Martin led to One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts introducing a bill that we had drafted to repeal the 2018 bail-in provisions. The Roberts bill triggered another significant Senate inquiry and attracted major media coverage. But again, the 2 major parties combined and voted the bill down. Back to 2018, because of the way bail-in had passed, the Citizens Party organised first independent MPs Bob Katter and Andrew Wilkie, and then Senator Pauline Hanson, to introduce our very first bill, the Separation of Banks Bill. The bill had been drafted by Citizens Party executive member and legal advisor Bob Butler, who's modestly up the back there, but on Bob's behalf I'm going to make a little boast. When the Parliamentary Drafting Office reviewed and formatted the bill for introduction, they returned it to Bob Katter's office with the text unchanged, noting that it was perfectly drafted. Now we hear from Andy, they're not lawyers. This bill was based on the very successful US Glass-Steagall Act 1933, which separated commercial banks with deposits from investment banks which gambled in securities. Our bill would have counteracted the bail-in risk to deposits by imposing the Glass-Steagall structural separation on Australia's banks, which would keep deposits safe by keeping the banks safe. The Citizens Party pushed the bill to another Senate inquiry, but under the pressure of heavy bank lobbying, the government sabotaged the inquiry and blocked it. In one meeting we had in Parliament about the bill, a Labor MP tipped us off that bank lobbyists were walking the building at the same time as us, telling politicians they must not support it. The banks were fearful because the Banking Royal Commission was underway, and it was proving the case that the banks should be broken up. So, despite the Citizens Party's supposed fringe status, with seemingly no power, the most powerful lobby in the country deployed their full might to squash our bill. In 2019, Bob Katter and Greens leader Adam Bandt introduced another Citizens Party bill called the Australian Banks Government Audit Bill 2019, again drafted by Bob Butler. This bill was inspired by a UK Labor Party report on the big four global accounting and auditing firms, PwC, KPMG, EY and Deloitte. The report had been prepared by a friend of the Citizens Party, Prem Sikka, who's now a member of the House of Lords. Our bill sought to advance the case for making the banks safe, to keep deposits safe, by mandating the Auditor-General to replace the corrupt Big Four global accounting firms as auditors of Australia's Big Four banks. The Big Four auditors had given clean audits to every Wall Street bank that subsequently crashed in 2008, so they can't be trusted. Our bill would have ensured the first truly independent audit of Australia's major banks for decades. Not surprisingly, the government made sure the bill wasn't debated. However, this collaboration with Fraser Brindley and the Greens to expose the corruption of the Big Four accounting firms in this way set the scene for the explosive Senate inquiry into the PwC scandal, to which Andy Schmulow's contribution has so infuriated PwC. Also in 2019, the Citizens Party worked very closely with John Adams and Martin North to lead the opposition to the Morrison government's $10,000 cash ban. Recommended by a KPMG report, the Liberal government's policy was to jail Australians for spending their own money, so they could initiate the process towards a cashless economy that traps all Australians inside the banks. The campaign broke all records at the time for submissions to the exposure draft of the bill and forced it to a Senate inquiry, which was also swamped with submissions. We also forced public hearings that the Senate had not intended to hold. The power of the testimony in those hearings, including from John Adams, destroyed the bill, and eventually Parliament dumped it. As John Adams observed, this was the first instance of a campaign that used social media, like YouTube, to mobilise Australians to stop a bad law. Starting in 2017, but taking off in 2020, a torrent of lies flooded the media about China, mostly from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, funded by the US and British governments and the world's biggest weapons manufacturers. The lies laid the foundation for Australians to accept the AUKUS scam and its $368 billion bill. The Citizens Party was almost a lone voice, certainly among political parties, in rejecting and debunking those lies and arguing forcefully against the insane talk of war. Many of the lies relied on outright xenophobia, which was inciting physical and verbal attacks on Australian Chinese. We recognise they were of the same type as many of the Islamophobic claims that had raged during the so-called War on Terror, to justify both our involvement in evil wars and the fascist anti-terrorism laws that imposed police-state powers that had once been considered unthinkable. Our almost lone stand against this agenda in Australia attracted support from many Australians who shared our concerns, including leaders of the Chinese community. It also led to a very productive collaboration with former Ambassador John Lander, former Senator Dio Wang, and other experts in diplomacy and foreign policy. Later, others started speaking out, including former Prime Minister Paul Keating. And thanks to those efforts, you can say the rhetoric has definitely shifted. However, the core policy that is pushing us to war hasn't, because we don't have an independent foreign policy. In 2020, it was only, and I'm going to emphasise that, only the Citizens Party who questioned whether there was another agenda behind Scott Morrison's brutal bullying of Christine Holgate out of her job as CEO of Australia Post. Every single experienced political operative we consulted said the same thing. There was no agenda. Giving out gold watches, mate, that was a bad look. Christine Holgate's only defenders were the licensed post office group, who insisted she was the best CEO Australia Post has ever had. Working with the licensees, the Citizens Party exposed the truth that Christine Holgate was removed because she opposed the government's secret privatisation agenda and because she had taken on the banks and intended to establish a public post office bank. Our campaign turned around public opinion and triggered another Senate inquiry. When otherwise sympathetic politicians implored the licensed post office group to not work with us, the licensees replied, "Everyone else is talking. The Citizens Party are the only ones getting anything done." The inquiry cleared Christine Holgate's name and exposed the serious problems within Australia Post that threaten the survival of the post office network. Most of these problems would be solved by the Citizens Party's policy of a post office bank. In 2021, the Citizens Party took up the cause of the 130 elderly victims of the Sterling First Rent for Life scheme collapse in Western Australia. These are a tiny subset of the hundreds of thousands of financial victims this century. The Citizens Party's involvement forced the Sterling First case to a Senate inquiry into the collapse of the scheme and ASIC's failure to regulate it. To take credit for this issue, the opposition Labor Party promised the Sterling victims they would be included in a compensation scheme of last resort, but they broke their promise as soon as they were elected. Nevertheless, this inquiry became a stepping stone to the much bigger Senate inquiry into ASIC's investigation and enforcement triggered in 2022 by John Adams' report, which the Citizens Party helped to establish. The Citizens Party continues to fight for justice for the Sterling First tenants and all financial victims in the form of financial compensation funded by the banks and other perpetrators of financial abuse. In 2022, the Citizens Party helped Senator Malcolm Roberts establish an inquiry into Project Iron Boomerang. This is a visionary development project for the top end to value add to Australia's immense coal and iron ore resources by producing steel here in Australia. Significantly, the Albanese government supported the inquiry, sparking a small glimmer of hope that visionary nation-building ideas were back on the agenda. When the inquiry was at risk of failing, we were able to bring in genuine experts to get it back on track, prompting one impressed participant to comment, "There's nothing the Citizens Party cannot do." The inquiry made positive recommendations to advance the project, but it's up to the government to follow through. In 2023, we worked with the Greens and mobilised against the government's RBA reforms bill, which would elevate the Reserve Bank above any democratic accountability. We forced it to a Senate inquiry with a flood of calls that prompted one Senate staffer to comment, "There's no one like the Citizens Party to melt the phones down." Had it not been for this inquiry, the bill would have passed into law within weeks, thanks to a backroom deal between Jim Chalmers and Angus Taylor. This means a Labor Treasurer would have given up a power that much greater Labor men than he, John Curtin and Ben Chifley, had fought so hard to achieve. Unexpectedly, the inquiry heard from a succession of experienced RBA governors and treasurers, people we had never before agreed with, who nevertheless insisted, like us, that keeping democratic accountability is crucial. This hearing was enough to convince the Liberals to drop their support, which destroyed the backroom deal between Chalmers and Taylor. One influential Liberal senator, who we don't know all that well, was keen to meet with us because he wanted us to know that he had led the opposition within the party. He said, "I want you to know I'm fighting the good fight." When major party politicians are trying to impress the Citizens Party, you know a political sea change is underway. Sadly, this campaign was the last time I got to work with Fraser Brindley. But thanks to Fraser's willingness to work with us, our collaboration on these issues has continued with the Greens. In February 2023, the Citizens Party achieved the Senate inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia. This has proven to be one of our most consequential achievements, made possible through our collaboration with independent journalist Dale Webster, banking expert Martin North and Queensland Senator Gerard Rennick. The inquiry expanded into a major investigation, conducting 13 hearings in 15 months across the length and breadth of the country. It was a public relations disaster for the major banks and spooked Australia's two biggest banks, CBA and Westpac, into reversing branch closures and announcing 3-year moratoria on all regional closures. Multiple coalition senators on the committee commented that it was the most successful inquiry in which they had ever participated. Think about that. These were coalition senators. They had been in government for 9 years. They had had the power. They could have acted on this issue any time over the past 5 to 10 years. Until we forced this inquiry, they felt it wasn't their right to scrutinise how the banks manage their businesses. As soon as the inquiry started to scrutinise the banks squirmed like crazy. The Citizens Party's leadership on this issue prompted the senators to invite us to testify in December last year. In the testimony Glenn Isherwood and I presented, we were able to lay out the public post office bank solution, which had been our goal from the beginning. We achieved this goal when the inquiry handed down its report in May, with the committee's second recommendation being for the government to establish an expert panel to investigate establishing a public postal bank. This is the first truly serious, well-considered parliamentary proposal to return to government banking since the neoliberal privatisation era commenced in the 1980s. The Citizens Party immediately called for Christine Holgate to chair the expert panel and for Andy Schmulo to serve as a member. We know the inquiry's recommendations had an immediate impact because in August the government revealed to the media a post office bank is now on its agenda. With the caveat that we're yet to see the details, we are on the cusp of what would be the biggest victory in the Citizens Party's history, achieved through our relentless focus on policies that are grounded in the principle of the common good. For the sake of time, I just want to mention briefly other campaigns in which the ACP has played a supporting role. Freedom for Julian Assange, Protect Whistleblowers and Free Dan Duggan, and we're kind of a lone voice on that almost. Stop the mad social media censorship bill, almost mission accomplished. Stop genocide in Gaza, achieve peace in the Middle East. What can the Citizens Party do from the inside? This is a unique experience and record which makes the Citizens Party undeniably qualified to represent citizens in Parliament. I'll finish on these points. As you can see, the Citizens Party values cooperation in politics. What we bring to this cooperation is our focus on the issues related to breaking the power of vested corporate interests over our country, so Australians can once again know that the government they elect is truly in charge and therefore can be held accountable to them. We don't get distracted by side issues. We don't play the games of political charades that the other parties play, especially the major parties, who denounce each other viciously for the cameras while doing the backroom deals that retain the status quo. We want to work constructively with all parties on areas of common ground and increasingly drag the major parties out of their neoliberal mire. We don't want to get in there to grandstand. We want to get in there to get things done. Likewise, while the Citizens Party is building a force of like-minded people to get into Parliament, we don't try to take a position on every single issue. There's too many that arise, and we don't expect our people to agree on every single issue. We assume our people would always support our core issues, but Citizens Party representatives would always be able to vote their conscience to truly represent their constituents. Our hope is that this would contribute to a change in culture in Parliament, so debates in the chambers are genuine debates and participants have the ability to persuade their colleagues through reason. So let me conclude this way. Australia is supposed to be a commonwealth, which the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines as a nation founded on law and united by compact or tacit agreement of the people for the common good. The entire ethos of the Australian Citizens Party is its commitment to this compact and determination to ensure the Commonwealth of Australia lives up to it. In other words, we really believe government should serve all the people. And that is not just something for politicians to say. We don't accept the degeneration of government that has systematically disenchanted and destroyed the trust of so many citizens who see that government does not serve them, but only vested interests. The Citizens Party is a party of people who angrily reject the platitudes of politicians who say, well, that's the way politics is, there's nothing we can do about it. And we equally reject the demoralised complaints of our fellow citizens who say, well, what do you expect? There's nothing we can do about it. We believe something should be done about it. We believe we have the responsibility to do something about it. We believe something can be done about it. We are doing something about it, and we will be able to do a lot more about it if the voters send us to Parliament. Thank you.